Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, my dear brothers and sisters in Islam. Welcome to a new episode of our program, The Pool of Ideas, exclusively right here on Huda TV with Dr. Mahmoud Khalifa. If you remember, in the previous episode, we began talking about liberalism. We defined it, we talked a bit about its history, and one of its founding fathers, John Locke. And we also talked, my dear brothers and sisters, about some of the basic principles of this ideology. In this special episode, inshallah, we will be comparing the perfect system of Islam with this man-made ideology known as liberalism, which is obviously very well known in the society that we live in. Doctor, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us.
Thank you for having me here.
Let's begin, inshallah, with the idea of freedom of religion. What does liberalism say about freedom of religion, and what does Islam say about this concept, and how do they compare with each other?
Actually, liberalism doesn't believe in freedom of religion as such. It is more about freedom of belief. You are free to believe whatever you want, but you don't do that in any organized way. You don't do that in the public space. You do not have freedom of religion in any way that would challenge the existing secular system. And liberalism tolerates religion but doesn't accept it. It tolerates differences, but at the back of its mind, secularism and liberalism are the biggest haters of religion. And they think that religion is going to be eroded piecemeal, because still there are religious passions, there are believers in the world. They don't want to clash head-on with religious dogma. And as such, they are thinking that with the passage of time, religion is going to be eroded from the individual's consciousness with the passage of time, with the spread of secularism from the public space to the private space. And basically now we find that the private space is not even free from the secularism which occupies the public space. So actually liberalism banished or succeeded in banishing religion from the public space and relegated it to the private space. But now even the private space is being interfered with. You are being shaped to believe certain things, to believe in certain ideas. In the educational system, you're pushed towards atheism. So basically liberalism is somehow atheistic, because basically although it tolerates religion, it doesn't
Accept it.
promote it.
Yeah.
It is very much against it, but in very subtle ways.
It's very interesting how you're saying that we are taught in schools atheism, because I was actually just today having a discussion with someone, and we were talking about how Darwinism is taught, in science classes for very young children. We're basically being told that we evolved
That's
from
my point.
other creatures.
That's
Subhanallah.
the point, because secularism defends atheism in a quasi-scientific manner. For example, we know that Darwin's dogmatic ideas are hypothetical. This is not a scientifically proven idea. Darwin's survival of the fittest, or whatever his ideas about that the universe or all human life sprang up from one cell that developed later on into different species. These ideas are hypothetical, and they presume that God doesn't exist. And if you teach them, if you put that in the educational system, you are somehow assisting an ideology of atheism and disbelief. And that's what liberalism counts on. It counts on changing the mind of children, of students, and as such secularism will have achieved a 100% presence in the life of human beings.
If we compare this ideology and this system to what Islam says when it comes to the freedom of religion, what can we say?
Actually, Islam's freedom of religion is apparently very ahead of its time. I mean, Islam, 1,400 years ago, advocated freedom of religion, and this is clear from the Quranic address. I mean, there is no coercion in religion. لا إكراه في الدين قد تبين الرشد من الغي. So Islam doesn't accept the faith of somebody who is being coerced. And it allows the coexistence of religions. It allows people, Christians, Jews, even other belief systems that do not originate in a revelation are tolerated in an Islamic context. So basically, Islam espouses freedom of religion, and that is clear from the constitution of Medina. In Medina, you had Jews, Christians, and we have Jews in Medina, and they were protected. They had all their rights protected, and they were considered citizens of the new state of Medina. This citizenship came as a result of the Islamic view of the universe, that all people are brothers in the faith and brothers in humanity. Okay? And the final judge as to the truthfulness of anything is God. So Jews are not coerced into believing in the prophethood of Prophet Muhammad and the finality of his message. But they are in Medina, and as such they are part of the citizenry of Medina, and they are treated as such. So basically, Islam guaranteed that you cannot torture somebody to believe in what you believe in, and you still have your full rights.
Let's switch gears a bit and talk about the idea of individualism. As we discussed previously in the last episode, individualism is really one of the main tenets of liberalism. How does it compare with Islam? Does Islam believe in individualism? Maybe not in the way that it exists, but maybe it believes in individualism in a different way, or in Islam, is it all and only about the community and not about the individual?
I just want to add, before answering your question, I want to add one more point. In case somebody says that was 1,400 years ago, this idea of tolerance, of citizenship. But I mean, throughout the Islamic centuries, where there were Umayyads, Abbasids ruling, where the Umayyads ruled in Andalusia or Muslim Spain, Christians, Jews were even promoted to the highest levels in the ruling government. They became ministers, doctors, translators. The Jews flourished in Andalusia. All that because Islam accepts deference a whole lot before even a glimpse of that appeared in the West. So the Islamic liberalism is authentic because it is encoded in the Quran. And as long as the Quran is being read and is being followed, everybody, Muslim, non-Muslim, Jewish, Christian, Hindu, all these people are guaranteed their rights, which are enshrined in the Quran, where we say, لا إكراه في الدين قد تبين الرشد من الغي. There is no compulsion in religion. So that's as a comment on what I just, on your previous question. As for your question about individualism, now Islam has a unique balance between the individual rights and the rights of society. In the West, as we said before, it took things to extremes. From a total annihilation of the rights of man during the Middle Ages in favor of society, to a total move in the opposite direction, where society's rights are ignored in favor of concentrating on individual rights. Islam has created some kind of balance between the rights of man and the rights of society and the rights of God. Islam established many categories that would exhaust the many rights that exist. You can't just talk about rights of man and ignore rights of society or rights of God. So Islam has established a network of rights that are co-dependent. Okay? So the rights of society do not basically kind of cancel the rights of man or the other way around. So a man is responsible towards his society. Its defense, it is welfare. He contributes to the benefit of the welfare of society. On the other hand, the society doesn't restrict the freedom of the individual to move, to have his own property, to have his own life, to have his own space. So Islam has taken care to give everybody his own space. Individual space, the social space, the space for God. I mean, the prayer times, this is a space for God. You go to the mosque, you have your own space of action, of taking your own decisions. And society has its own space. And all these three spaces are interconnected. The extremes that exist in the West are not relevant to Islam. This extremist concentration on individual rights come in a way that is detrimental to the rights of the family, for example. When you turn 16 or 17 in the West, you leave your home, your father's home, you find a job, you find a place, I mean, and you may just never turn back or appear again. You may travel to another country, disappear for 10 years, then call your father or mother. I mean, the emphasis on individualism has destroyed the family as a unit.
Thank you so much, Doctor. SubhanAllah, we always get to see how perfect Islam is and how really it is the middle way in everything, alhamdulillah. Even in the way of thinking, not just in acts of worship or Islamic rulings, but even in philosophy, even in the way of thinking. So, alhamdulillah.
Islam, yeah, is in the Quran we read, وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا. We have created you, or we have made you a middle nation. So we are, this is the good medium, or the good middle, which allows for extremes to come to a middle ground. You're not in the extremes of individualism or in the extremes of denying individual rights in favor of a community or of a society.
We need to take a short break, but inshallah, my dear brothers and sisters, when we come back, we still have a couple of more issues that we want to talk about, some of the principles of liberalism. We want to compare them with Islam, so please stay with us. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back, my dear brothers and sisters, to the Pool of Ideas. This is our final segment on our comparison about Islam and liberalism, Islam versus liberalism. Doctor, let's talk a little bit about the idea of the freedom of the press. This is a very integral part of liberalism and at the same time a very, very important part of Islam. But how does each present the idea of freedom of the press?
The freedom of the press in liberal democracies is meant to be a check on the government institutions. And as such, freedom of the speech, freedom of the press is very important because it works as some way of controlling the other bodies of society, of checking that the government is working properly, of revealing any problems in society, of revealing any corruption. So governments, institutions are always watched by the press. So the freedom of the press is very important in any modern society. When it comes to Islam, freedom of the press is very essential as a religious duty. It is not just a secular duty as it is in the West. Freedom of the press, saying the truth, telling the truth, is essentially very important. And as such, because freedom of the press is part of a Muslim's role in forbidding what is wrong and ordering what is good. And in that context, freedom of the press is one way that essentially is integral to Islam's way of protecting the rights of society by adding one more constraint on actions that might be taken by the government. So freedom of the press in Islam is not a new thing. Although, of course, that we're talking about Islam as in its ideal form. In modern times, we see that most of the Muslim countries are ruled by a tyrannical government who put a lot of constraints on freedom of the press. So, but in its basic form, Islam allows freedom of speech, freedom of the press, in order to allow people to say the truth, to check on wrongdoing, to check wrongdoing by declaring or making clear or making known any irregularity anywhere in the government institutions or in society.
How about, from an Islamic perspective, what does Islam say about the freedom of the press when it comes to, for example, promoting ideas that go against Islam publicly on television or in newspapers, or, for example, promoting mischief, you know, like films or kind of like sitcoms and soap operas that promote, wrong in the society?
You can't have any freedom as a general rule. You can't have any freedom without constraints, because absolute freedom means absolute corruption. So basically, freedom of the press or freedom of speech or freedom, any kind of freedom is constrained by certain things. So if freedom of the speech is of speech or freedom of the press, it is not meant to allow people who want to spread mischief or fitna or destruction or who want to, for example, popularize certain ideas that are against Islam. All these are not allowed. They're not under the same idea of freedom of the press. It is freedom with a constraint. You can't be free to destroy. It's like you have a freedom to life, okay? So Islam protects the positive part, your life. But you're not as an individual free to kill yourself. You're not free to commit suicide. So freedom in Islam is constrained by what is good for everybody. But in the West, because of its individualism, freedom, even you can have freedom to kill yourself, and we hear now freedom of mercy killing. Now everybody, you can go to a doctor in certain Western countries and you can easily take away your life with the assistance of a doctor. For example, mercy killing in the West is you can just go to any doctor and get your life taken away through some
assisted suicide.
Yeah, assisted suicide. So the problem here is Islam allows for freedom, but a freedom that is for the good of everybody, as I just said. So basically, you are not given, even freedom of speech has its limit. Even freedom of the press. For example, sometimes the press isn't free to talk about certain judicial cases which are being judged in order not to affect the court's decisions by making it a cause célèbre and so on. So sometimes even even in Western countries, you can get the court orders that there should be no press about a particular suit case, to allow the judges the freedom, psychological freedom, not to be affected by the public opinion regarding a particular case. So here freedom is always limited, and the constrictions on freedom of the press is a cultural thing. Every culture has its own way of looking at what should be said, what should be published, and what cannot be published. The press, freedom of the press doesn't mean that you trample, that you destroy or go beyond the accepted limits of morality and of society. So basically, any kind of freedom will have its own limits set by society.
Finally, let's talk about what Islam says about the idea of private property, owning property by the individuals, and what liberalism says about it.
Actually, that's where Islam and liberalism seem to agree on individual property. In Islam, individual property is guaranteed. Your right to your property is guaranteed. In Western liberal societies, the same is guaranteed. As such, here is an agreement against, for example, the ideas of Marxism. In Marxism, there are some limits on what you can own, and sometimes everything you have may just go to the maybe nationalized by the government and taken over. So basically, when it comes to private property, Western liberalism seems to be the closest to the Islamic concept of private of the right to private property, as against the Marxist claims that property should be in the hands of, or the basic, or there should be a limit on what you can own in Marxist or communist societies.
Finally, as you were saying, subhanAllah, liberalism in the world that we live in today is a thriving ideology. What advice do you have for those who are watching us right now and who may be under the fitna of liberalism, that it's really, a great thing, and maybe it's working in some parts of the world, and maybe we should be, as Muslims, we should follow this idea, and that it really goes right along with Islam, and these types of things. What kind of message do you have for people watching us who may believe that?
My message is clear. If you're a Muslim, you have all that is required. You have in Islam. Go and read the Quran. Go and check Hadith. Go and read books on Islam by Muslims, by Muslim intellectuals, and by some fair Western writers, and compare, because you'll always find that Islam has already talked about a particular practice or a particular freedom. Mm-hmm. Do not be seduced away from Islam by a passing vogue or a passing idea. The world of ideas is changing very fast, and we should be clear about the fact that we as Muslims, we have certain standard points of reference. So if you go to the West and get to Marxism or liberalism or whatever, then you are changing your point of reference, and you have to choose. If you're a real Muslim, a committed Muslim, you keep to the point of reference, that is the Quran and Sunnah, as your point of reference in all matters. Okay? You do not go and judge Islam according to standards he doesn't accept. Okay? For example, in terms of the sexual freedoms allowed in the West, which Islam doesn't allow, you can't say that Islam limits or restricts the sexual freedoms of people, because you're judging Islam from the point of view of a totally different civilization. Mm-hmm. That has relaxed all moral restrictions on sexuality. So the definition of sexuality in Islam is totally different from the definition and purpose of sexuality in the West. In Islam, it's not sexuality isn't only about enjoyment and pleasure. It's always within the frame of creating a family. So it has both pleasure and family. In the West, you could be having girlfriends and you turn 40 and 50 and you're not married and you're just wasting your life gaining pleasure, more pleasure, until you finally you're not capable of taking more. So the point is, Islam has its own standards. Don't judge it by reference to other cultures or religions or ideas, however attractive or seductive these ideas may be.
Thank you so much for all the great knowledge and advice and for this rich discussion. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
My dear brothers and sisters, that was our discussion on Islam versus liberalism. By that, we wrap up this topic. Thank you so much for being with us in this episode. Until next time, inshallah, take care of yourselves. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.